Campbell Price is curator of Egypt and Sudan at the Manchester Museum, part of the University of Manchester, honorary research fellow at the University of Liverpool, and chair of trustees of the Egypt Exploration Society. He's organised several award-winning exhibitions in his time as curator at the museum, and is the creative mind behind the much-lauded Golden Eyes of Egypt exhibition, which launched in February this year. So please, everyone, join me in welcoming our keynote speaker, Campbell Price.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Wow, it's quite loud. Can everyone hear me in the room? Yes, I will. So it's really a pleasure for me to be with you in person here in Cairo. Welcome to those joining us online. For two reasons. As Robert said, my day job is in Manchester Museum, one of the great collections of Egyptian and Sudanese antiquities in the UK, if not in Europe, and the beneficiary of, through the fines division system, of antiquities from the site of Abydos. So we'll touch on a couple of pieces which are now in Manchester Museum. But also it's my great honour to be the current chair of trustees, as you've heard, of the board of the Egypt Exploration Society. So I would like to extend and amplify the thanks of my colleagues, Dr Carl Graves, the director of the society, and his staff, to thank all the organisers here, especially Essam Maghi, our colleague here in Cairo. It's a pleasure because, as you heard from Robert, the idea for the conference, for a meeting, for a workshop was nurtured by the Egypt Exploration Society and has become the big successful event we're all attending now. So I'm delighted. Tramani, thank you, special thanks for getting the idea off the ground, and I really look forward to listening to some interesting discussions. So, the site is very well known to some of you. Is it possible to put the light off at the front? I just think maybe the screen might be clearer for speakers if the light was off at the front, but I'm sure you can still see. As we've already heard, it was 125 years, I'll use this rather useful image, or a map of Egypt and Sudan, mapping out the sites that the EES has worked at in its previous history. The society itself has been working in Egypt and Sudan for over 140 years, founded in 1882. And as you can see, there's a great legacy of archaeological work. As Robert said, the EES, like lots of institutions, reflects on its history, the nature of its work in the past, the nature of its work today, and future prospects. But it goes without saying, for anyone who's familiar with Egyptology, that the site we're discussing, the site of Abydos, is absolutely central to, there we go, to any understanding of pharaonic Egypt. And this is what I tell students in Manchester. As we will see, and as I hope to illustrate very briefly, Abydos is this great, central, legitimizing, very ancient, even to the ancient Egyptians themselves, focus point. It is the site, as we will hear from cutting-edge research taking place at the moment, an important cemetery for the first rulers of Egypt, and that key acknowledgement of the importance of that royal cemetery, that divine cemetery, continues throughout the pharaonic period and later. We know it. The name Abydos appears in the classes, the first classes we might take in hieroglyphic writing. It is something which appears conceptually. So it's a geographical place, but it also has, of course, associations with particular gods, and it appears as part of this divine landscape. So in pharaonic times, you can have a physical geographical place, but also you can have a conceptual place that is associated with certain deities. And of course, as we will hear in the next 3 days, the preeminent deity is Osiris, the god of rebirth. And one of his epithets, illustrated here in this New Kingdom painting, is foremost of Westerners. So this concept that Osiris is the kind of conduit, if you like, between the world of the gods and the world of humanity is seen in geographical terms by this entrance, this wadi, this valley into the west, which is, of course, as I say, a geographical place. You can walk in the direction of the west, but it is also a conceptual place, because the sun is rising in the east and it is setting in the west, in the land of the dead. So these are big concepts: life, death, eternity, and they all find a particular focus at the site of Abydos. So to illustrate a little bit of the geography of the site, which you will hear about from those much more qualified to speak than me, clearly, like any site in Egypt, it is not simply a site of occupation for one restricted period. It is a palimpsest. It is used and reused and reused. It's like an onion, the layers of an onion, built up over a long, long period of several millennia. So, yes, there is great activity in the early dynastic period, but there are real focuses of interest in the Middle Kingdom, in the New Kingdom, and well into the late period. What I like about this image you see on the screen, it's taken, oh thank you, slightly clearer now. This image on the screen, you can see the general topography of the site, but this has been taken from a publication where you can just about make out the image behind it has bled through, and you can probably recognize, if you know anything about temple architecture, that's the temple setting first behind. So it's a structure that absolutely dominates discussion, and I'm sure we'll hear lots about it this week. But there is so much more to Abydos than those beautiful, crisp, luxuriant carvings from the early 19th dynasty. Robert already mentioned something about the people who worked there, and so he mentioned the Frenchman Amelino. I mentioned that Amelino's techniques left a lot to be desired. Flinders Petrie describes in one account what wasn't taken as a major monument, something like this, which is now in Paris, was burnt in Amelino's kitchens. So he was not averse to burning wooden material of no doubt great historical importance, just to keep a fire going, which is absolutely horrendous. But this is the nature of archaeology, in a way. Sometimes it's done well, sometimes it's done badly. We can have a critical perspective on it from the here and now. The reason, of course, we're here now, I guess, celebrating 125 years, is, as we've heard, Flinders Petrie's association with the site. Now, Flinders Petrie was supported by the foundress of the Egypt Exploration Society, Amelia Edwards, but Petrie himself could often be quite a disagreeable character. He was quite prone to an argument, he was quite headstrong. In some ways he didn't like people, or living people, that much. So he fell out with various groups, individuals, organizations, including the Egypt Exploration Society. But for some period, while he was associated with us, the EES, he conducted some really very important excavations into Abydos, which, as we will see for the next 3 days, revealed aspects of the site, of the topography, aspects of the use of individual structures, and revealed objects which continue to be debated and reassessed and re-examined and recontextualized. So, of course, fieldwork is important, but fieldwork is only one part of the story. You find things, you find buildings, you find sites, you do the archaeology. That is only the beginning of some kind of understanding some kind of interpretation which can continue in some ways independent of the archaeology. So to take the case of Abydos, I'm delighted to say that one of the vice presidents of the Egypt Exploration Society and my predecessor as the keeper of Egyptology at Manchester Museum is Rosalie David, Professor Rosalie David OBE. She and I both studied at the University of Liverpool, and her PhD thesis was an analysis of what the hell was going on in those scenes in the decoration of the Temple of Seti I. Often called a mortuary temple or a funerary temple, this is a kind of a redundant term. It's not about death or funerals really, it's about life, eternal life. This is a mansion of millions of years of Seti I. And I'm delighted to say that the Egypt Exploration Society reissued this publication with beautiful colour plates from the work of other epigraphers in the temple, and you can buy it online through the Egypt Exploration Society website. But it's... Yes?
We just need to adjust the screen.
Okay.
So you can see it.
Oh yes, sure. It's okay. I wouldn't want anyone
You're getting into your flow.
Yeah, it's fine. That looks good. Oh, and I've got presentable now. Fantastic. Someone can Zoom check.
Is anyone on Zoom?
Hopefully everyone on Zoom now can see the screen, so that's the front cover of Rosalie David's book, Temple Ritual at Abydos. So that work is of great importance because it provides the evidence, a publication of the evidence, for scholars to consult. Not everyone, sadly, can visit the temple in person. Not everyone can look up at the wall and make their own interpretation directly face to face. So this is why publications of this material is so important. And speaking of that, and thinking of the recent, very exciting history of the site of Abydos, I'm delighted that the Egypt Exploration Society was able to support the work of the Abydos Temple Paper Archive project. This is something I'm sure we're going to hear more about, but really a significant opportunity to better understand the people, because archaeology is done by people, and up to now the story has centred largely on the Western excavators who arrived and did their work and disappeared again. So to understand the logistics, the business of archaeology by using sources in Arabic is extremely important. So I look forward to hearing more about that. If I may, for the last part of my talk, be allowed to reflect a little bit on the archaeology itself. There's a little bit of feedback here, but it's okay. Malish. The site, as I already said, was a historical site to the ancient Egyptians themselves. And it's really a case study in the interpretation and reinterpretation of existing ancient structures in pharaonic times. So, every student of the history of Egypt knows about these early dynastic tombs, royal tombs at Abydos. One in particular is of significance, the tomb of Jer, a known historical character that becomes reinterpreted, not willfully as a misunderstanding, but as a natural interpretation of this early dynastic king, as in fact the tomb of Osiris himself, locating the burial, the resurrection, the rebirth of Osiris at a physical historical monument. And this is one of, to me, the most exciting aspects of the discipline of Egyptology, is understanding ancient attitudes to ancient monuments. One of my favorite pieces in the collection of the Egyptian Museum in Cairo is this Osiris bed, which is the product of the late Middle Kingdom reinterpretation of this tomb of Jer as the tomb of Osiris. The text has been damaged, published by the great Anthony Leahy, a great Grand Master of all things Abydos himself, showing that that text originally was the work, or the monument was the work of a second intermediate period king, King Jer. And so that image of Osiris redivivus, Osiris coming back to life, being regenerated through the key agency of his wife, the magician, great of magic, the sorceress, the goddess Isis, in order to conceive their son. This is one of the prime, central, state level, if we can call it that, myths of Egyptian kingship. This is located in the historical landscape recognizable to the ancient Egyptians themselves, of at least the late Middle Kingdom onwards. And it is an image, of course, that persists. The cult of Osiris really booms, in popular terms, into the late period. You know, Osiris is not simply this conceptual state god of eternity or rebirth. He is someone to whom relatively normal people might address their prayers. And that is reflected in the name for that sacred part of the site of Abydos, the Gab, the mother of pots. These are not the pots of tomb goods necessarily, these are the pots of pilgrims going, visiting, wanting to leave an offering in the expectation of some kind of response. Because that fundamentally is what the reciprocal nature of religion so often is. You do something in anticipation of some kind of return. And it's in that way I think we should interpret these great stelae from the terrace of the great goddess Abydos. This really takes off in the Middle Kingdom. So maybe it's a little more of a blind spot in the history of the site, but huge numbers, hundreds of these stelae, small statues, parts of little chapels or cenotaphs. So not the tombs of these individuals, but a space, a place for those people to be present, to be eternally present for whatever rituals were taking place in the sacred area below. Something about these stelae is particularly interesting to Egyptologists because they are group stelae. These are group family commemorations. They tend to have lots of named individuals shown on them. And that's great for a modern historian because you can start to build up family trees. And you get this sense of the site of Abydos, particularly from this period from the Middle Kingdom, as being a site of pilgrimage. Something like a Mecca or a Lourdes. Somewhere you would go, maybe you wouldn't go, but you would send a monument which could stand in your place, because that is the materiality of religion, that is the materiality of magic. If you're represented there, you shall remain there eternally. And it is not, of course, just elite people. Of course, you would have to be fairly wealthy, I suspect, to be illustrated on one of these stone stelae or some of the little statuettes. But royalty is represented there. This is a place also of royal legitimation, which is hardly surprising given the myth of Osiris. So this is one of the most interesting pieces out of 18,000 pieces from ancient Egypt and Sudan that we have in Manchester Museum. This photograph was taken by my friend and colleague Julia Thorne, who I'm delighted is now working as our part-time publications manager at the Egypt Exploration Society. And it shows something really strange. And I've spoken to other Abydos specialists about this, people like Stephen Harvey. It is, at first glance, something following the model of a new kingdom, mid to late new kingdom, private stela. But it's not. If you look very closely, you see several royal figures here. So to look at the top, on the extreme right, you have the god Amun, ruler of Thebes. And that connection between Abydos and Thebes, I'm sure this will be discussed this week, that's an important one in the New Kingdom. In front of Amun, though, is a very interesting group. You have King Ahmose I, very associated with the site of Abydos. Behind him, the deified Queen Ahmose Nefertari, and in front of them, a figure whose identity has been deliberately removed. Always very intriguing. The jury's still out. I would fully believe that's Tutankhamun, whose name has been erased there, so of course a well-known figure to all of us. And in some way, perhaps, this is to be interpreted as a mini restoration stela after the Amarna interlude. Not only is the cult of Amun-Ra at Thebes and associated gods restored, but the cult of Osiris at Abydos is as well. And on the lower register, again, this is a very, very weird, iconographically very strange composition. So you have Osiris seated, and can you notice he's not bound up, he's not wrapped in his traditional, standard, typical shrouded form. He's kind of free-limbed, and in front of him is King Amenhotep I. So already a venerated figure by the late 18th dynasty, and behind him, very strangely, are unidentified, undesignated people. What this stela represents as a whole, I'm not entirely sure. I wonder whether it was really begun as a private stela, and then it was co-opted for royal use, maybe in the reign of Tutankhamun, and then Tutankhamun's name has been removed. But it illustrates quite nicely this point, that Abydos is a place of really deep history, deep ancestral royal history. It's the place you would go as king to, if you're Seti I, affirm a connection with a beautiful temple mansion of millions of years. And even if Tutankhamun wasn't building something quite on the same scale, he is still present. And that stela allows him to be shown, and therefore legitimately to be doing this form of veneration to his ancestors, because he's grouped with these great kings of the past, and towards the gods. And so that really is what the site of Abydos to me is most important as. It's a place of ancestral encounter. This is another Manchester Museum piece, a piece of relief work from a structure of Ahmose I, where he's shown coming face to face with God. And I show this image to students in Manchester to show that the god and the king are in some sense indistinguishable facially. They have different attributes, different crowns, different beards, perhaps. But the king is made of divine stuff. The king will become Osiris. Osiris is every dead king. So there's this melding between the ruler of Egypt and the ruler of eternity in the form of Osiris. And that idea, that concept of ancestral encounter is perhaps most nicely illustrated by a piece which has already been discussed. I think Essam just mentioned this. So this is one of the key discoveries of the Egypt Exploration Society at Abydos. It's something that almost every tour guide in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo highlights, because it is the irony that the only complete surviving image of Khufu is this tiny little ivory sculpture. So he makes the Great Pyramid but he himself is only represented. As far as we know, goodness knows, maybe his Valley Temple's full of sculpture just waiting discovery, who knows. But it's an intriguing piece if it's 4th dynasty, and we know there are 4th dynasty Old Kingdom things going on at Abydos, but even more intriguing to me, as someone interested in the late period, was the suggestion championed by Dr. Zachary Hawass that this is in fact a much later sculpture. This could be 26th dynasty, so 2,000 years after the reign of Khufu. The style of the crown could be archaizing. Could be easily convinced that that is an archaizing image of Khufu. So you can manufacture, you can engineer these encounters between living kings or recently deceased kings and the great gods of Abydos and their ancestors, but you can also facilitate these encounters between kings from the past. So that's what the stela I showed in Manchester shows, and what this wonderful piece now in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo from Abydos shows. I'm delighted to say, just in closing, that this is one of 50 objects featured in a forthcoming book, Ancient Egypt in 50 Discoveries by the Egypt Exploration Society, currently being edited by my colleague Dr. Stephanie Boonstra and I, featuring lots of Egyptian and international scholars. We're finalising the text of that book now, and I look forward to it being published in the end of next year, towards the end of the summer. So if you want to know more about the work of the Egypt Exploration Society, there's lots of information I see in your handouts. Do look at our newly relaunched website, ees.ac.uk, and if anyone would like to know anything more about the Society, ask Essa, probably better than me, but if you want to know about Manchester Museum, do drop me a line. Thank you very much for your attention.